This is an interesting time of year because we are ending something and beginning something else. Like we're in a threshold and we don't get a choice. We have to go through 2025. We just have to. We can't stay in 2024. So as we talk today about reflections of gratitude, let's just bear in mind that we don't get a choice about the world moving forward and time continuing on, just like my husband said just a moment ago. It just keeps ticking, and we got to keep up. So how do we do that? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Before I do, I wanted to say first, I said this last week, Merry Christmas Kwanzaa. So if you catch that, it is Kwanzaa, Christmas, and Hanukkah all put together, Christmas Kwanzaa. Today is Ujamaa, if I'm not mistaken, in the Kwanzaa tradition, which means cooperative economics, and it talks about shared work, shared wealth, and shared good. Today is day 5 of Hanukkah, which is a celebration of history, light, and community. And if you follow the 12 days of Christmas, today you're going to get 5 gold rings. 5 gold rings. Darlene asked me if I would talk about Gratitude Day today, and she called it Reflections in Gratitude, but I would call it Reflections in Gratitude or Gratitude in a Time of Uncertainty. Does that feel adequate? Uncertainty? It's a weird year, right? Just in the past 3 months, we have had a hurricane that came through, and I know if you saw the rain coming down, you were a little nervous today, like myself, right? We talked about that driving here. That was a pretty hefty rain. We had an election that was very divisive. We had Congress debriefing on UFOs. We had drones over New Jersey. We had some things going on with the healthcare system. I won't go into great detail, but you get where I'm going. Like, it has been a wild ride, and that's been 3 months. It has been a wild ride. And I know if you're like me, there have been times where you're just, oh my God, what's happening on the planet? What's going on with me? That is where our spiritual practice comes in. That is where we have to really anchor ourselves in our truth, because the world will pull us away. It is our responsibility to practice these principles that we learn at Unity. And the one I'm going to talk about today is gratitude, as I said. Last week, I talked about joy. For those of you who were here, we talked about joy being a practice of cultivating the experience of joy. It's not just something that happens, as with the word happy. Happy means happen. It's the same root word. It means something that's very fleeting. But joy is something we are called to cultivate. And when we cultivate joy, we connect in with the divine deeper. Gratitude has a similar understanding, and I told my spouse today I'm putting some Easter eggs in this talk for him, if you know what I mean, like when you go on a website and you find the Easter egg that does a little thing, like a special little treat. Put a couple Easter eggs for my spouse in here. So this is in the first one. I also looked at the etymology or the origin of the word gratitude, because I like I said last week, I'm a huge word nerd, and I love where words come from. And so the last week we talked about joy and happy. This week, gratitude comes from Latin that we use today, which means, it's very interesting, I didn't know this exact definition, to welcome, to greet, or to praise. To welcome and greet. That's the one that stumped me. We're going to explore that more in just a moment. But the word is further back in our history. It goes to ancient Sanskrit. And if you know anything about language and the history of languages, Sanskrit predates Latin. And it literally means to praise. And my Easter egg is, because you probably heard my spouse's accent, he is Polish. And in Slavic, ancient Slavic, it also means to praise. To praise. So we are, in our practice of gratitude, we are welcoming and praising. So let's look at what spiritual traditions say. The Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18, Be joyful always, which ties into last week. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Jesus Christ. Give thanks in all circumstances. Now, it is easy to have some gratitude when things are going your way, right? When you're prosperous and you're attracting things and you're living this great life. But what about on the flip side of the coin? What about when life isn't so great? What about when there's a major hurricane that comes through? How are we to find gratitude in those moments? How do we practice that? In the Quran, Surah Ibrahim 14:7 says, "And remember when your Lord proclaimed, if you are grateful, I will certainly give you more." And the Buddha himself says, "A person of integrity is grateful and thankful. This gratitude, this thankfulness is advocated by civil people." So what he's saying is, if you want a life of peace and of civility, we must practice gratitude. A moment ago, I asked you, when things aren't going so well, how do you practice gratitude? And I want to give you an example of that. There is a practicing physician a practicing psychologist, I should say. She's a psychologist, Dr. Christina Costa. And if you were in the prayer class that we did, Reverend Barbara Ann and I did back in January, you may remember we showed a video on gratitude by this lady. She is a PhD psychologist who studied specifically positive psychology, resilience, and well-being. That was her practice. She was diagnosed with a cancerous brain tumor in 2000, I think 18 or 19, somewhere through there. And if you look at a scan of her brain, there is a tumor in there that looks like the size of an egg. Imagine sitting in her brain. And here she is. It's interesting how the universe does things like this, right? She is studying her PhD at the time on positive psychology, well-being, and resilience, and she gets a brain tumor. And she starts thinking she might die. She doesn't know the operation. If you know anything about brain surgery, it is not just a simple surgery that is outpatient by any stretch. She immediately went, which all of us do, into pity and fear. I mean, of course, that's going to happen, but we can't stay there, right? We have to move on. So she said she felt like if anybody could have this and pull through, it's got to be me. Obviously, I was pulled into this for a reason, so I'm going to practice what I preach. And she practiced gratitude. Every single day, she would kiss her brain. She would pop her little thing, and she used to teach this. She was a teacher at the time as well. I think she was a middle school science teacher, and she would tell her kids, you have to kiss your brain. We have to love our brain. Our brain does so many things for us. So she would do that every day. She would pray for her medical team, everyone at the hospital, from the coders and billers to the doctors and the nurses. She was lucky enough that she's based out of Detroit, and they had the brain surgery center that she could go to, but many people have to travel far. So she was very blessed with that. She also blessed and prayed daily in gratitude for science. That was very important to her, because if it weren't for science, she would not have this brain surgery. I can tell you that surgery happened in 2020. 97% of the brain tumor came out. She went on to have a child, and she is a professor at Wayne University, which is based out of Detroit. And here's where, when you start delving into these things and you get these little synchronicities, you say, okay, I love how these things happen. So as I'm preparing this talk, we had out-of-town company this week. My two sons' godfather, who actually happens to live in Detroit, has been down visiting for Christmas, and he's been in our house a few times. And I was telling him about this talk and about Dr. Costa. And he said, where does she teach? And she's a teacher of psychology at Wayne University, I told him. And he said, huh. And all of a sudden he pulls out his phone and he does a text. I'm like, who are you texting? And he said, I'm texting my good friend who goes to Wayne University. And guess what? She's in Dr. Costa's class. And she said Dr. Costa was the best teacher she ever had. And she had no idea that she had gone through this experience. So if you're curious to know more, look at on YouTube. She did a TED Talk. It's about 10 minutes long. It's all about her overcoming this obstacle in her life using the tool of gratitude. So to keep that going and to keep the understanding of that, and what she said, as I said, she talked about science. So what is the science? What does the science say? The science says 5 things. It actually says more than that, but I narrowed it down to 5 to keep it brief. If you practice gratitude, it releases toxins. It releases toxic emotion in the brain. So if you have PTSD, if you have depression, anxiety, if you practice gratitude, it lifts you up. And I say this with all the people I work with, and I'll tell you this too. Keep a gratitude journal. Go to the dollar store today. For $1.25, you can buy you a cute little journal, and you can start gratitude journaling today. I would highly encourage you to do that. The second thing is it reduces pain by increasing dopamine. It improves sleep by activating the hypothalamus, which regulates sleep patterns. It aids in stress reduction by reducing cortisol levels. And it reduces anxiety and depression by reducing stress and calming the central nervous system. So we spend a lot of money going to the doctor. And if we could just take the pill of gratitude, we may stay away from the doctor, but that one yearly checkup. So I want you to stop right now. Put your hand over your heart. And I want you to think of 3 things you're grateful for in this moment right now. I'm going to give you just a second. If you're having trouble thinking of something, what about the breath you just took in? Or the feeling of your heartbeat beneath your hand? Or this beautiful spiritual community and the people that are sitting around you? Those are things to be grateful for. Gratitude practice doesn't have to be this expansive. It can be something simple as a beautiful meal, or watching the rain come down outside while you're drinking tea, and maybe watching the Unity service on Sunday morning. Whatever it might be, there are so many things to be grateful for, even in those hard times, even when life feels really challenging. And we know that as we move into 2025, it might be challenging. We are called to practice gratitude. We are called to do that. As we practice gratitude, it anchors us in deeper to joy. And that was the talk last week, was about how we could cultivate joy. So go get your gratitude journal today. You might need it as we move into 2025. I'm going to give you a story of something that recently happened to me that I think really embodies this experience. For those of you who know, my oldest son, Ian, is going to be 16 in 3 weeks, which I'm still like wrapping my brain around that. He's going to be 16. When we started coming to this church, I think he was like 6 or 7. So you all have seen him grow up. He's going to be 16. And my oldest son experiences autism, for those of you who know us well. And autism is a very unique way of perceiving the world. It's a very beautiful way. It's a different way than the average mortal, as I like to say, sees it. They have a unique way of understanding interaction and seeing patterns, and it's a beautiful experience. And I say this because my son also experiences a lot of health issues. And so he has this way of being in the world that is very precious. We have to see specialists quite often because of all the health issues. And we often have to drive to places like Hickory and Charlotte to see a specialist. And I'll tell you that I get really excited for those trips because my son loves pop music. And so we dance all the way there in the car, listening to music. And this time when we went to Charlotte it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we went to Charlotte, the Christmas carols had just come on. So we get to listen to, he likes a combination of pop music, K-Love, and Christmas carols. I'm like, this is gonna be a great road trip. We're gonna have so much fun. And we did. I picked him up early. We had to be there, I think at like 1:45 or 2 or something. And I picked him up early from school and I said, we're gonna go and have a road trip, just you and Mama. And I said, we're gonna have lunch. You get to eat wherever you want. Just please don't pick McDonald's. Please don't pick McDonald's. McDonald's and I don't do well together. But I said, you get to choose where we're gonna eat and we're gonna listen to pop music and sing all the way to Charlotte. And he was so excited and so was I. So we get in the car and we drive. And if you know anything about Charlotte, it's about 2 hours away, roughly. So we fly down there. We're down there in 2 hours. We have plenty of time for lunch. Everything is going great. I can't remember where we ate. I think it was like Zaxby's or something, but whatever. It was good. We had fun. And then we get to the hospital. We meet this brand new doctor who happens to be Polish. Wink, wink. He was a really good doctor. And he was kind and very supportive of where we were going and what we were doing, and I had a lot of questions for him. We have to get Ian's blood drawn. That goes off. Ian has had some issues with having his blood drawn. That went smoothly. Everything was going so well. I thought, this is great. I was sitting in gratitude, like, thank you for this great day, until we get in the car to leave. Our 2-hour trip took 5 hours back from Charlotte. 5 hours. It took us an hour and a half to get from the hospital to the interstate. We're not even talking on the interstate and driving. We're talking in the city of Charlotte. And there was this period where I'm like, okay, well, we can just listen to music. It'll be fine. I had no idea it was going to be 5 hours at that point. So we're listening to music and we're fine and we're singing. And then after we had moved a mile in like 20 minutes, I remember I was white knuckling, the steering wheel, and I'm starting to think, this is why we don't live in Charlotte. This is why we moved from Chicago. I hate traffic, hated it. And I feel this little tap, and I'm like, what, Ian? What do you want? And he goes, sing, Mama. Okay. So I started singing. We're singing and we're singing and we're singing. Now, this is 5 hours, so you can imagine that my mind did not just stay in the singing the whole time. And I started going right back again, and I started going to the white knuckle, and I get the tap. Sing, Mama. And he does this to me, I don't know, 47 times? No, it wasn't that many, but it was a lot, because I could not pull myself to stay in the moment. I kept getting angry, because people in Charlotte, my experience in that moment, were mean. Nobody was letting me in. This is before I had my license plate that said Vibrate Love. Nobody. No one was letting me in. And it was just this awful, awful experience, or so I kept telling myself. It is this awful experience. And there was this one moment where it finally hit me after my child so lovingly kept patting me on the shoulder all these hours. I'm not grateful for anything. I'm complaining. That's the thought in my head, is how miserable I am. And so I stopped and I said, I'm just grateful that we have plenty of gas. I'm just grateful that the car is warm. I'm grateful that if we need to get a hotel, because at that point I was thinking we might be stuck in Charlotte overnight, I'm bountiful. I can pay for the hotel. All of those things. And then it shifted. And all of a sudden the traffic freed up. Now, it could have been that we had been sitting there for 3 hours at that point, and finally people had just gone home. But in my head at that time, it didn't matter, because all of a sudden it freed up. And then we were outside of Gastonia. We had just made it 3 hours to get to Gastonia. And then we got to Gastonia and the traffic cleared and we just flew right home and we had the best time. There was a gentleman who wrote a book several years ago, maybe even close to 20 years, by the name of William Stillman. And he finds himself on the autism spectrum as well. And he hypothesizes that people with autism, now this is not a blanket statement, but there is some science behind it. I love my science. There is some science behind it that the people with autism naturally have higher dopamine and serotonin. So much so that they have similar brain structure as the way that their emotions are like a yogi who meditates for hours per day. Same amount of chemicals in the brain. Most of us mere mortals don't have that, right? So we are going to find ourselves trapped in Charlotte in traffic, and we get a choice. And I know that not all of us have an Ian to tell you to bring you back. And so I would say, don't be like Reverend Meagen. You can do this. You can do this without Ian. Bring yourself to think, what am I feeling right now? And what are the thoughts in my head? And say one thing, just one, even if it's horrible, just the horrible experience, there's at least one thing in that moment that you can be grateful for, right? One thing. Whether it's somebody who loves you, whether it's your kids or grandkids or nephews or nieces or children in your life, they always bring joy, stress too, but joy. I encourage you to find that thing in your life throughout the day as a spiritual practice. The more you do that, the more the joy will stay, because it's a practice of cultivating that experience over and over again. I have been debating how I'm going to close this talk this whole week, because Spirit gave me a nudge to do something which I've never done before in front of you all. Even my husband doesn't know this, and he's like, what is she going to do? My 14-year-old son, my younger son, Marcus, has been exploring hip-hop here of late. And that has been his thing. And so, of course, me being an old school, loving old school hip-hop, there is an old school hip-hop station, and I'm always turning it on, and he's like, oh, because it's, 30-year-old music, but it's still really cool. So we've been exploring hip-hop, and we've been exploring social activist hip-hop and old school and all these different things. And so hip-hop is in my brain right now. In fact, we had a little rap thing last night where we were playing around. So this feels good to me to be able to give you a little bit of New Thought rap. Whew. I'm so grateful my children aren't here right now, because I know his eyes would be rolling in his head. One day we will have this YouTube video and he will say, my mom was cool, but probably not today. So if I'm gonna do this, I'm not doing this by myself. So I'm gonna need a beat, all right? Okay, here we go. As we move into 2025, our practice of gratitude must stay alive. Consciousness is not merely to survive. Remember your connection and learn to thrive. For we all must learn to exude a positive and loving attitude. Now, I don't need any platitude. Just remember to practice your gratitude. Thank you. I can't believe I just did that. Joey, would you come up? Where's Joey? Thank you. Ooh, yeah. So joy is about having fun and making yourself look really corny. And that's just what I did, because I love joy. And I'm grateful that you all give me the space to feel safe enough to explore that. Thank you. So we are going to move into a meditation. I just ask you to take a deep breath. And joy is going to the joy of Joey. It's going to play behind us. Let's take a deep breath. Centering ourselves in that divine oneness, in that place of gratitude, in that place of stillness, as we learn to cultivate joy with the practice of gratitude. Let us bring forth that feeling right now of joy as we think about all the things we're grateful for. Let us keep that anchor deeply, deeply, deeply inside of us and use it frequently. For it is through these practices that we know God is there. When we connect in deeply to the divine, joy can't help but be a part of the experience. And as we take this step forward through the threshold into 2025, we ground ourselves in love and peace, community. Remember that we have each other. We have the support of this community. We have the support of ourselves and our connection with the divine. We are stronger than we know, braver than we think. When we are centered in the divine, anything is possible. So as I close out this meditation, allow the joy of joy to just be with you in this moment.